It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody. Starring the irrepressible Andrew Bernstein and the resolute Robert Begley. I am Andrew Bernstein, and you are indubitably Robert Begley. How you doing this afternoon, Robert?
I am doing great, Andy. Ready to talk about both of our favorite heroes in the history of literature.
The
Let's go.
inimitable Howard Roark. Yes, been a long time coming on the Hero Show, but we built up to this, the greatest hero in literature, in my judgment. In fact, I wrote a whole essay on that for the
Mm,
objective standard heroes of great literature, where I gave the reasons why I think Howard Roark is the greatest hero in world literature, comparing him to some of the other great heroes, like Odysseus and Shane and Cyrano. But so let's do it. It's hard to give his dates, right? We know he was.
1900 to
Yeah,
whenever, right? We know he's born
yes,
1900 because he starts at age 22 and the year is 1922. So that's about all I could. And
yeah,
the timeline goes past the the Great Depression, right? There's still it, or it actually
yeah.
takes place
Late
during
It's the late 30s, I
during the
think,
Great Depression.
where the
Late
story
30s,
ends.
yes.
Yeah, so
Hmm.
he's maybe
Hmm.
38 when the
I
38,
think so.
39
Yeah,
when the story ends. But Howard Roark's
hmm,
going to live a long, healthy,
that's right.
fulfilled life, right? 1900 to 1990 something, and going to keep designing. Keep designing. His revolutionary buildings. Of course, Rock dies in the 1990s, at least in our version of it. But his creations are timeless, and Ayn Rand's creation of his character is certainly, and that story is certainly timeless.
Yes, yes.
Without,
Andy, one thing before we plunge into Rourke, I have a little fun little evolution of a hero from a kid's perspective. My first hero, Spider-Man.
Spider-Man,
Then,
outstanding.
then Achilles. Okay, so I go from
Uh,
comic strips to Greek mythology, and then we mentioned Lord of the Rings, but then once I met Howard Rourke, it's like life before Rourke, and then everything is life after Rourke. That is the Ayn Rand hero, her first ideal man. That's why we're naming the show The Ideal Man, and just wanted to get that in there like as early as possible because it's just the way that another thing that I really like about it, Andy, is he young people's he's if we look at like college student or high school age, he's their age, 22, just starting out in life, and that's one reason I think he's incredibly influential for young people
no,
as a hero model.
No, I absolutely understand. So so let me put in my own 2 cents here, because I'm a kid in the 1960s. Always a hero worshiper. And so, but my earliest heroes. I'm reading the James Bond novels. This is even before the first James Bond movies came out, and I think the novels are better anyway. But I'm reading Ian Fleming's
Yes,
novels. I
in
love
Fleming.
James Bond. Yeah, yeah, I love Ian Fleming's characterization of James Bond. I found we were talking about Sherlock Holmes and the Benedict Cumberbatch series just before the show, which I think we all recommend. It was outstanding. But I was reading Sherlock Holmes stories, when I was 10 years old. Love Sherlock Holmes. Will always love Sherlock Holmes, right? The genius hero. And in fact, John Hersey and I did an episode on the Hero Show on Sherlock Holmes. And John Wayne was
First
still
fictional
alive.
character.
Yeah, right. First fictional character. That's right. And John Wayne was still alive, making westerns. Always depicting frontier justice, and superbly. I think Clint Eastwood in the Man with No
Spaghetti
Name and the
westerns and
spaghetti westerns, and then his Dirty Harry. But these are all tough guys. They're all secret agents or detectives or gunfighters. And some of Sherlock Holmes is a genius. But Howard Roark is a real life kind of. He's an intellectual hero. He doesn't have to shoot anybody or beat anybody up. He's an intellectual hero, and for me, as a kid who always wanted to be a writer, Howard Roark showed that the intellectuals can be heroes, and of course, in Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand shows that the rational intellectuals are the most fundamental heroes of all. But I admire James Bond very much. I still love the Ian Fleming novels, but I never wanted to be a secret agent. And I love Shane, Jack Schaefer's great novel, but I never wanted to be a gunfighter. No, I want to be a writer, and Howard Roark for me, yes, the intellectual as hero. Yes, it just hit me like this when I was 16, and he's still the beau ideal of what a real man should be in my judgment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Andy, I'll tell you, I'll go back to 1984. You're teaching a class at the New School in New York City, and I'm just getting to know you. And you made one statement about independence. I don't know if you remember it, but I do. You said, whenever I think of
Oh,
independence, I think of a guy with red hair. It's like, just comes to me, some guy with red or orange, one of the two, or orange, hair. And it's like Howard Roark, that's it. And I was like, this guy's my brother in spirit, no matter what, because I'm the same exact way. All right. And that's
yeah,
that's so let's go to independence as
yeah.
the
Right.
theme. And
You look up the word independence in the dictionary, and there's a picture of Howard Roark there. I mean,
you said
yeah, right. That's Ayn Rand captured it so brilliant. I mean, it's just what's so great about Ayn Rand. The character embodies this abstraction, this moral virtue of independence, and he's so alive. He's not just an abstraction like he would be in the hands of other writers. He's a living flesh and blood breathing, individual. His passion, you could feel his passion for architecture, for Dominique, for his closest friends like Gail Wynand. Yeah, he is truly a brilliant creation on the part of the author. So, all right, so you want to start with independence?
well, just on what you said, what's the first sentence in the novel?
Howard Roark
Howard
laughed.
Roark laughed. That's it. So the joy, we're already getting a sense of joy, which I think is not emphasized enough. But the way you said it, yes. And here's a friend, Bosch, and
Yes, this is
Carrie Ann
this.
commissioned him for this, and we're grateful to you for that, Bosch. But Howard Roark laughed. That's it. You open the book, you see that. I'm all in. I want to know what's going
Yeah,
on with this man,
yeah. He laughed
and
when he
then we
just got
get.
expelled. He just got expelled from architecture school. It even makes
So
it even
we're
better.
seeing the independence right from, he's laughing, he's on the top of a cliff looking down, and all these aspects of nature, how he could reshape it, okay, and in his own image. And yeah, independence is from the first scene we see him.
Yeah.
Well, actually, if we could say as an Aristotle concept, all potential, right? He's naked,
All right.
he's in
Yeah.
nature, and he's like all potential, but the independent spirit is there, which we learn, just a couple of pages later.
Absolutely. And by the way, we should credit Bosch Fawsted here for this brilliant drawing of Howard Roark, which Carrie Ann Biondi commissioned. Correct? Your
That's right.
lady love commissioned
That's
Bosch
right.
to
That's
do
right.
this.
I took it
Yes,
from her
and
office for today's show.
yeah, good job by Carrie Ann to commission. And she commissioned the right guy, Bosch Fawston. We want to give some credit here. If anybody out there in Hero Land, if you want a print of this, Bosch gave me his store. It's the Bosch Fawston store. And it's BOSCH. Fawston is FAWSTIN. The Bosch Fawston store.blogspot.com. The Bosch Fawston store is one word. The Bosch Fawston store.blogspot.com, and you
Yeah, we'll
could
put
get
it in the show
a print.
notes.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Get a print of this great drawing of Howard Roark by Bosch. Looks a little bit like Brad Pitt, doesn't he? But that's not a bad dude for somebody to look like. you know, Brad Pitt's played a few heroes in his career, but
That's true. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, independence, right from the start, right from the jump, as they say. And by the way, just want to pick up on something that a number of readers may not notice. Howard Roark laughed is the first sentence of the book, and then the last sentence is what the sun, the sky, the ocean, and the figure of Howard Roark. So Howard Roark bookends the whole novel. Howard Roark are the first two words, and Howard Roark are the last two words in the novel. Not
Yes.
an accident, I'm sure, on Ayn Rand's part.
No.
You show him
And
dominating the universe of his story.
And if we stay with the Aristotle theme, fully actualized at the end. So he's in nature, the first scene, and then he's man-made what he has created on top of his skyscraper, his greatest achievement up to that point. So, but let's go in between those two bookends.
Yeah.
And
yes,
we see his independence with Mrs. Keating. We see his independence with the dean, the first scene with the dean, which is really important point in the book because he's looking for the principle behind the dean. That's what he names it. What is this principle behind the dean? And only, hundreds of pages later do we get him to say actual, selfishness versus self-sacrifice, and how do they relate, and clarifying the difference between the two. So there's, which is like a variation on independence here. It's not exactly the same thing, but just in the first scene where with the dean, we're getting to see all the adversity that he's already faced. Some of that adversity we see he's working his way through school. So again, the independence here, and the dean thinks he's helping him out, and Roark is like, no, I should have left long ago.
Yeah, why would I want to come back here?
And do Italian postcards, right?
Right. And Ayn Rand is such a brilliantly subtle writer. There's a lot in Ayn Rand novel, especially a fully developed masterpiece. Speak of Aristotelian actualization. Ayn Rand actualized her capacities as a novelist in the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. But I think there's a lot that goes over that people miss. Certainly Ayn Rand's critics who just don't get it at all. And personally, I don't think they're honest. I don't think these literature professors who are disrespectful to Ayn Rand, treat her as like some third-rate novelist. If they're literature professors, they should know enough about literature to be able to appreciate Ayn Rand's subtleties, even if they disagree with her philosophy. But anyhow, so notice when he leaves the dean, you're right, Rob. He knows this is important. There's something fundamentally different between me and people like the dean. I have to figure it out. It's important. I'm 21 or 22. This is going to be important in my life and my career. And yet he steps outside and he sees the sunlight on the field stone, and immediately you see Howard Roark his mind goes to what he loves. Architecture, think of what he could do with that stone. And of course, at the deeper level, the philosophy here, Ayn Rand showing us in action, not talking about it, she's showing it. Ayn Rand's orientation is towards nature, towards reality, towards the world, not towards society, not towards other human beings. He knows he's got to live with other human beings, got to work and be friends with, and in Dominique's case, be in love with. But they're important, but they're secondary. And Ayn Rand showing us in action very subtly, the independent man, his orientation is towards nature. And that's why he's the one who can build and grow and create and make life possible. He's not concerned primarily with not just is he not concerned primarily with society, but certainly not with the depredations of society. You got to figure it out, because these guys can impact my life. But that's not his primary orientation. He immediately forgets about the deed, and the evils in the world, in the human world, because he sees the world of nature, and what he could do with it. That's the essence of an independent person.
Yes, and with the dean, there's one interaction they have with each other, which is now like a popular quote. You're gonna build that way? Who will let you? And Roark is, that's not the point. The point is, who will stop me? Okay, I'm a creator, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'm not going to look for clients. I only need clients in order to build. So he's reversing the causal relationship that everyone else has totally taken for granted here, because he thinks independently.
Yeah, there's so much deep stuff in Ayn Rand,
Mhm.
and it's so beautifully, subtly done. You can see it over and over again in so many different ways. Who's going to stop me? Who will stop me? Ayn Rand show us in the novel, and in a free society, a creator like Roark can't be stopped. And by the way, I should say something. I wrote an essay. The Freedom Gradient in Ayn Rand's novels was published in one of
Mhm.
Ed Youngkin's collections, and Howard
Okay.
Roark lives in the freest society that Ayn Rand depicts, because
Yes.
equality in Anthem lives in a totalitarian state that's fully fully collectivized. Kira and Leo live under communism in the Soviet Union, and Hank Dagny and the heroes of Atlas Shrugged live in a mixed economy, a
Collapsing.
mixed society. Yeah, it's collapsing into dictatorship. The
Mhm.
and the uh, in We the Living and in the Fountainhead, this is where Ayn Rand depicts real societies, the Soviet Union, 1920, and
Yes.
the United States, 1920s and 1930s, in contrast to Anthem, which is set, in a hypothetical future, and Atlas Shrugged, which is also in a hypothetical future. Howard Roark lives in the freest society of any depicted in any Ayn Rand novel by far. This is by far the freest society depicted in any Ayn Rand novel, and Roark knows in a free society, Toohey can't stop me. Nobody can stop me, because I'm free to build. I'm free to find the Gail Wynands and the Austin Hellers and the Roger Enrights, and the Kent Lansings and so forth, and
Even
they
the
can't stop me.
Fargos, John
Toohey,
Fargos. Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
right, exactly. Now, Toohey, of course, a
Mhm.
Marxist intellectual, wants to impose a communist dictatorship in America, and
Yes.
Toohey would then be the intellectual power behind the throne. In that kind of a state, he could stop Roy. He could have him dragged off to a gulag, and that would be the end. But not in the free
Mhm.
society in the United States of the 1920s and 1930s. Toohey can slow Rourke down somewhat. The Started Temple is a brilliant scheme on Toohey's part. It's absolutely brilliant. I think he's the greatest villain in world
Yes.
literature. But he can't. We'll discuss Toohey, right? But we can't. He can't
Yes, we
stop Rourke.
will.
Not in the free country. Not in the
No,
free country. He can't stop Rourke. So yeah, who's going to stop me? He says the D, knowing it was 1922. Nobody in the
that's
United
right.
States in 1922 in a free country could stop him.
Hmm.
And Ayn Rand,
Yeah.
Ayn Rand, doesn't do a lot of discussion about politics in the Fountainhead. Toohey's the only one who ties the book's themes to political goals. Not a lot of discussion of politics, but Ayn Rand shows us in action. In a free country, you can't stop the Howard Rooks. If Toohey gets control that he wants, he can and will.
Right. Yeah, and so your point there, I think to me that's one of the great appeals to the Fountainhead as a novel, and then to Rourke as an individual hero, is that yeah, it's real life. Also, now if I go to myself and my own units, it's New York City. This book is a
Right.
tribute to New York at its best, and there are sentences in the novel where it is the greatest city in the world. Peter Keating goes at the end to visit Rourke in the Enright House, and this was my background in reading the book. These were the units I had of what skyscrapers were and the importance of skyscrapers. And Rand even credits the field, the great geniuses of skyscrapers and who have created them. And Rourke's model, his mentor early on, Henry Cameron, was the fictional character in the novel who launches the birth of the skyscraper movement. And that's something that will come. In the beginning, Roth doesn't do skyscrapers until later on in the novel. But what I see is that this ties in also the freedom, the the free market element, and the freedom of expression element both tie in. And that's, I'll tell you, Andy, this is what's personally appealing to me about The Fountainhead has an. This is one reason why it is my favorite novel, because it has that real life background, and it's much more uplifting, as I see, in the units and in the potential of what can be. So that's part of what we can consider like the enduring legacy of the novel.
Yeah, I hear you. It's my all time favorite novel too. My all time favorite book, fiction, nonfiction, any genre you want to
Yeah.
name. If I had to be
Yeah.
cast away on a desert island with one book, it's The Fountainhead. I'm taking with me.
Yep.
And this
Yep.
the Goldilocks principle comes into play for me here. Mama's bear's porridge was too hot, and Papa Bear's
Yep.
porridge was too cold. Because other people's books are too small relative to The Fountainhead. Atlas Shrugged is too big in a certain way, in that John Galt changes the whole world. I mean, he just changes the world. It's an amazing story of a man who said he'd stop the motor of the world, and he does. He changes the whole world. But Howard Roark doesn't change the whole world. What he does is he carves out a rational niche in his own life, in a world that's often crazy, social institutions dominated by the most evil creature in the universe of that story, Ellsworth Toohey. And yet Howard Roark succeeds in carving out a rational niche in his own life, in his own world, in effect. And this is what Ayn Rand shows us. This is what a rational human being can do, even in a irrational society. The society of the Fountainhead is freer than the others in Ayn Rand's novels, but still is socially dominated by Ellsworth Toohey. Nevertheless, this is what one person could do in his own life, his or her own life. It's not about changing the world. It's about
Yeah.
carving out a fulfilled life in your own purview, and that's just the right size for me. It's just right. Like Baby Bear's porridge was for Goldilocks. It's just right. That's
Perfect.
probably the first time anybody ever analyzed Ayn Rand's novels in terms of Goldilocks. But
So one of the things she's so good at is concretizing these characters, and if we look at Rourke's the other characters who revolve in his universe, the first one that we think of is Peter Keating, who's in the early scene with him, and we see again this dependence versus independence, and how Keating is all about other people and impressing other people, looking for prestige, giving up his love, which was painting, art, fine art, for architecture to please his mother. And Rourke is telling him he's giving him, trying to nudge him along to be more independent. You'll go out on your own earlier if you start with Francon and higher. So we're seeing how not only is Rourke for himself, but he wants the others around him to carve out their own, like you just said, Andy, to carve out their own path by their use of their own mind, and go the direction of pursuing their goals.
right, right. I mean, what's prestige? You know, I, you don't know. It's just not that important. It's social approval. Rourke wants
Yes.
approval from certain people. From people that he respects, whose judgment he respects, and who he loves. What Henry Cameron tells him, I don't know if Cameron. I don't remember if Cameron even says it in the novel, but we can extrapolate. If Cameron's a curmudgeon, but he's the greatest architect alive. And if Rourke is working on a drawing and Cameron's, you think these are good? Well, they're awful. And eventually, Rourke gets it. Cameron says quietly, "Good job, Howard." That's something that's going to mean an enormous amount to
Yes.
Howard Roark.
Yes.
Dominique
Yeah.
praises him in her distinctively Dominiquean fashion in her column. I hope that building's blown up in a future air raid, because she's saying it's too
Mhm.
good for society and society doesn't deserve it. Well, coming from the love of his life, that means something to him. But, even now, but certainly the approval of society in general, people he doesn't know, and in many cases whose judgment he wouldn't agree with or respect, that's very that's an enormously secondary thing. Even the approval of people he loves and respects is secondary to his own judgment regarding the work. But it's a good thing to have from certain people. But Ayn Rand shows how meaningless it is. The character of Peter Keating is brilliantly done, Robert. As a cautionary tale, he goes,
Yes.
so he marries Dominique Francon, even though he loves Catherine Halsey. She's the boss's daughter, so he can kiss up to the boss. But more, she's like, she's beautiful and elegant and stylish. And when he walks into the Four Seasons, with Dominique Francon on his arm, it's like walking in, with Jessica Chastain or, Scarlett Johansson on his arm. Everybody go, turn, ooh, and it's those few moments of ooh from the yokels. This is what Peter Keating sells his soul for. But then the party's
Yes.
over. He's got to go home with Dominique. He doesn't love her. She doesn't love him. Love her, doesn't even like her. She tells him to his face. She sees through what a phony fraud is. She tells him to his face, when he proposes to her, if I ever do something really horrible for that I need to be punished for, I'll marry you. That was her response to a proposal of marriage. He's terrified of her. He's intimidated by her as well. He might be. And so he gets a few moments of, ooh, from the yokels. But for that, he sells his soul. He lives this empty, loveless life. That's not a good trade-off. He should marry Catherine Halsey, the woman he loves and who loves him, and they'd be happy together. And Ayn Rand shows, wow, what a story that is. The guy who sells his values for social acclaim and prestige is a very bad trade. I just want to say one last thing. We'll get back to Roark. Whenever I reread the novel and Dominique comes and knocks on his door and says, you proposed to me. Well, he's got Catherine Halsey practically waiting at the altar for him. She says, you proposed to me once, Peter. Well, now is your chance to marry me. And I'm yelling at him, send her away, send her away. Roark will be happy with her. You won't be. But every time the dumb schmuck does the same thing, he doesn't send her away. He never listens to me. He always does the same stupid thing. He sells his soul for the woman who brings him, social approval, social acclaim. Wow, Ayn Rand showed brilliantly, the trade-off here between personal values and social acclaim or prestige. It's no contest, right? It's no low contention.
Yeah.
Keating does what Roark would never do. Never sell out his values.
No. But I think the one important thing, Andy, as well, is that everybody knows a Peter Keating. Not everybody necessarily knows a Howard Roark in their life, but they know a Peter Keating.
That's good.
And
good
I think
point,
that is important. The universality of that kind of person, you just say Peter Keating and everyone knows what you're talking about. And it's so sad because at the end you feel, Roark says he has this feeling of sickness that he's never had with everyone else in his life, that this person with potential threw it away because he constantly sacrificed himself to impress others, his mother, for too much of his life. And you see how he cringes in every scene. And Roark is not affected by her. He's drawing and he's trying to remember who she is when she interrupts him. So it's like just independence versus dependence. Keating is the obvious way that people relate much more. And
you're right.
Go ahead, Andy.
Sinclair Lewis wrote a famous novel, Babbitt. When George Babbitt is the archetype of conformity, and he's the main character in the story. Peter Keating is a much better representation of conformity than is George Babbitt, and he's not even the main character in the story. Ayn Rand created Ayn Rand out, Babbitt in a secondary character in the story, part of her, extraordinary genius. And you made a really good point. Everybody knows, conformists like this. For many years, I used to teach the Fountainhead as the main textbook in my ethics courses until the educational system devolved to the point where the kids can't understand, the Fountainhead anymore. So I had to stop a couple of years ago. It was just too painful to watch. But I remember once in the 90s, I was teaching a business ethics class at Marymount's weekend college. So it was adults, and mostly women. It was a women's school, and a lot of the women worked in corporate America. We're discussing the Fountainhead. One woman, I can still remember the look on her face. She came running into class one day, waving a copy of the Fountainhead, and she sings out, "My boss is Peter Keating," she says. So you're absolutely right. That's a good point. Ayn Rand really captured the essence of conformity in Keating's character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just want to switch gears real fast, Andy. So the image that we have is from the illustrated Fountainhead of Howard Roark, which in 1945. So the novel was released in 1943, and sales trickled in. It wasn't a bestseller like immediately. So Ayn Rand had the opportunity. Somebody wanted to put it in serial fashion into the one of the publications. I don't know, Saturday Evening Post or something. But Frank Goodwin was the illustrator who did this, and Rand liked him because she said he looked like Frank O'Connor, her husband. So that's one reason I just wanted to add that a little backstory on the image that we have now of Howard Roark.
Yeah, I love the drawings of Roark in that illustrated or comic strip version of the Fountainhead. I thought it was terrific, very essentialized. It was very well done. But anyhow, yeah. You're right. The Keating, of course, is the perfect foil for Roark. He's not the villain. He does a lot of horrible things in the story. He practically murders poor Lucius Haya. But at the end of the story, like you said, Roark feels pity for him, and I think so do the readers, because
Yes.
he's not evil in the way Ellsworth Toohey is. He just wants everybody to love him. He just wants everybody to like him. He's pathetic. He needs to grow a backbone is what he needs. But Roark and Keating, you're right, they're the perfect contrast. Roark would never sell his values for anything or anybody. He knows, my happiness depends upon me, my work done my way, my relationship with Dominique Francon, my relationship with Gail Wynand is, that's what my happiness depends on. Selling out those values for social approval would just mean a life of misery. And he going by his own judgment is so strong in Roark. Again, notice the little, the independence, going by your own judgment. Notice the little ways Ayn Rand shows it. I was on his deathbed, Henry Cameron, his beloved mentor, father figure to Roark, warns him against the Wynand papers. You'll have to go against Gail Wynand and everything, every vulgar, low level way of looking at the world that the Wynand papers represent. Austin Heller, his trusted friend, tells him, there's something wrong about you and Gail Wynand. There's different classes of people. Remember, Heller says, and I'm not talking about Marxist language. He said, I'm not talking Toohey's language, meaning economic classes. He means there's the good guys and there's the bad guys. There's morally upright and there's morally depraved. People who never sell their soul versus people who do sell their soul. People he loves and trusts warn him against Gail Wynand. And yet, Roark's own judgment tells him, Wynand is very flawed, but there's real greatness in this man, and Wynand becomes his nearest and dearest friend. Ayn Rand's shown us so many different ways. How Roark goes by his own judgment, in contrast to Keating, who'll place his mother's judgment above his own, or Toohey's, or society's, but it's never his own.
Yeah.
Roark is always
right.
My own judgment.
That's right.
My life lived my way could be the leitmotif, right? My life lived my way.
My life, my work done my way.
Let's cue up Sinatra. Cue up Sinatra. My way. Whenever I hear that song, I think of Howard Roark.
Okay.
I did it my way.
Yeah.
I did it my way.
Nice. So the greatest hero needs the greatest villain. And you alluded to that earlier. In my opinion, I'm totally on the same page with you, Andy. Ellsworth Toohey is the greatest villain in the history of literature. And he puts Roark to the test over and over again, because he's explicitly, his purpose in the book is to have Roark's, one rope for one neck, and have him tied, bound. He doesn't want him dead. He wants him to submit. And
he tells
so
Keating as much. He
Yes,
tells
yes,
Keating. Yeah.
and I, I just think again. Well, let's pause on Toohey for a second. Rourke's reaction to Toohey is like, bring it on.
That's
I don't
classic.
care. I'm still
Classic.
going to build, right? I don't think of you. I just,
The one
I'm
meeting
above that.
between them in the novel. I mean, it's so brilliant. Only Ayn Rand could have written
Yeah.
it. Here's Tui, whose entire life, 100%, is devoted to the schemes, the scams, the manipulations necessary to control other people. He's completely non-creative. He can't deal with nature at all. Ayn Rand never shows him building anything, not even hammering nails into boards of wood to build a crude chair, table or chair. He's completely uncreative. He's like a virus. He lives inside the host organism, and when he kills that host, he move on to another. So he's completely dependent on the judgment of others. He meets Roark. He says to him, "We're alone here, Mister Roark. You can tell me, what do you think of me?" As Roark's answer is not. It's not just a crushing, riposte. I don't think of you. It's literally true. There's no braggadocio here. He's literally. I don't think of you. You know. And Tui walks off into the night. Right, you're up on the upper west side, right near where
That's right. Stoddard
it was the
Temple.
Stoddard Temple.
Hmm.
Yeah, so you're on
Yeah.
the bluffs overlooking the river, the Hudson River, and is the essence of Rourke. I'm looking at the Hudson River. I'm looking at the bluffs. I'm looking at nature. I'm looking at what could be done in nature, what I could create. Why should I think of germs? Why should I think of a human virus like you? It's the literal truth that he tells to it. That's what's so
Yes.
crushing. Tui knows. Tui knows
Yeah.
it's the literal truth.
And it's interesting because that's their first face to face in person, but Tui sees him at Kiki Holcomb's party for the Emright House, and he sees him as a force of nature. Okay, he doesn't want to be introduced to him, but he looks at Rourke the way he looks outside his window at the pavement, 40 feet, 40 floors below. Like, this will crush me. And Tui wants that adulation from Rourke, but that's central to Rourke's independence. It's like, I'm not trying to impress you. No, that's Peter Keating's job. That's other people's job. I am not trying to impress you at all because I'm just there to do my work my way, as you said,
Yeah,
and
it's
as is the
again,
theme
it's so
throughout.
so subtly done in the Fountainhead. That scene you referenced. It was at Kiki Holcomb's party, wasn't it? When he looks out the window, and
Yes,
and
yes,
he realizes what the ground would do to him if he fell out the window. Again, nature terrifies him. The law of gravity is gonna would result in him being crushed. He's terrified of nature. He won't try to deal firsthand with nature. He'll try and conquer other people who will be a shield between him and nature. Other people who can support him and take care of him. He's just he has no, he's smart. If he had made other choices in childhood, he could have been a contender. He could have been, somebody who could deal with nature and be more creative. Notice Ayn Rand shows us, even in his career, he's a critic. He
he's a
makes a living
critic.
by by critiquing
Yeah,
the works of
not
others.
creating,
He's
but
not,
yeah.
yeah, right. But criticizing in every way, shape, and form. He's dependent on others. And he tells Keating as much. He knows it. He says, more of a dependent on others than even you are."
Yeah.
And yeah, he is in his power lust. He is a brilliant power, and that's all he lives for in every way, shape, or form is control
And he's
over
very effective
others.
also, Andy. As you said,
Yeah,
he's smart, but he's very effective because he puts the seeds in all of the humanities, which he knows. I mean, his last encounter with Gail Wynand, he makes it clear you think power is cream pudding contracts, but no, power is run by
primo
me
pudding.
because I'm the one that indoctrinates every little seed, but just puts these seeds in every little portion of society for this these weeds to come to life. And we know that Roark is above it, but he's one of the few people who are above it. Dominique, the other characters who are right below Roark, are affected and really seriously threatened by Toohey. So that's why I think greatest villain, because he succeeds in spreading his weeds everywhere. And if I could just foreshadow, Andy, Atlas Shrugged, I think Atlas Shrugged is the world where Toohey kind of has succeeded, and it's
Right.
embedded.
That's
All of
right.
his seeds have kind of grown. So that just tells me her genius in depicting him
Absolutely.
as the symbol of evil.
Absolutely. And in real life, the United States
Yes.
today, the intellectual culture
Yes.
dominated by collectivism. The
Yeah.
the schools of education. This goes back to Dewey and William Hurd Kilpatrick at Columbia University 100 years ago. They, I mean, I had to stop using the Fountainhead, as a book in ethics classes, say 2018. Well, 100 years before that, 1918, Dewey and the leading quote educators were
Mm-hmm.
militated against the use of phonics. They wanted to use
Mm-hmm.
various versions
Right.
of the
Right.
of the whole word method. Well, 100 years later, to a tragic degree, like Toohey, they've succeeded. They've crippled the
Yeah.
minds of so many high school graduates who struggle now just with the mechanics of reading, never mind with
Mm-hmm.
reading comprehension
Mm-hmm.
of a profound book like The Fountainhead. You're right. This is Toohey. This is Toohey's method. Toohey
Yeah.
in Atlas Shrugged has become completely triumphant, and Toohey in the United States in 2021 is very close, or has moved very close to uh,
Mm-hmm.
being triumphant. When you have so many kids, they did it deliberately, Robert. They don't want. I mean, Ayn Rand was 13 years old in 1918. John Dewey could not have known there would be an Ayn Rand and there'd be a Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. But the literature of freedom, there was already a vast literature of freedom. He was going to make sure. Don't forget, Dewey and his peers at Columbia pilgrimaged to the Soviet Union, and came back with glowing
Yeah.
reports about education under
Mm-hmm.
Stalin. Uh, he was going to make sure that American kids at some point down the road were so intellectually stunted they were not going to be able to read the literature
Mm-hmm.
of freedom. We
Mm-hmm.
discussed the
Yeah.
Federalist, and those profound essays by
It's
Hamilton Madison and
yeah.
Che. Yeah, he was going to make
Yeah.
sure,
Mm-hmm.
Dewey and his peers were going to make sure that American high school graduates, even college graduates, were not going to be able to read the Federalist. And
Right.
and that's where
Right.
this is Toohey. This is Toohey. Uh,
Yeah.
but anyhow, I don't want to
So let's
get off on
go
current
now
events. Yeah, let's go back.
from
Yeah, go ahead.
the greatest villain to the most tragic, because all of these are the four parts of the Fountainhead that I'm following: Keating, Toohey, and now the most tragic
Well, just let me
figure.
say. Well,
Who
let me
is
say
it?
one last thing about
Yes.
Toohey. Let me say one
Go
last
ahead.
thing about Toohey
Mhm.
before we get to Wynand. What the, whose character I love. The tough kid from Hell's Kitchen. I love Wynand. But Toohey at the end, as Howard Roark rises up the side of the Wynand building. No, Dominique. Dominique rises up the side of the Wynand building to Roark up at the top. She's rising above the courthouses and the churches and the schools and everything. All the social institutions controlled by
Yes.
Ellsworth Toohey. She rises
Yes.
to the top of the building where there's the sun in the sky and the figure of Howard Roark. She rises to nature, above society, to
Mhm.
nature and the independent mind who can create in nature. And the symbolism, it's so brilliant. It's so
Yeah.
subtle. It's so brilliant. And yet it captures the whole story, you know,
Yeah.
right
And the
there.
private individual who financed that, not at taxpayers' expense as well.
Wynand's building. I mean,
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So and even Dominic is reading all of the electricians, and they're all private companies, named by these founders. Like she's making that distinction as well. That Toohey's not getting to these independent thinkers. The guy who creates the glass and all the different ones. So, yeah, we'll come back to that last scene many more times, Andy. But for now, yes, the most tragic figure. I love Gail Wynand, like you.
Yeah, me too.
Uh, in the beginning, I'm intrigued by him because, yes, Hell's Kitchen. We see his backstory is just is so. it's unlike it's unlike anything I'd read before because he, he he's a physical man. He's almost like the James Bondish type that you talked about earlier because he starts off beating this gang of little plug uglies and so he's got the physical side, but then he sees that newspapers are the way to go. That's how he could have power. He seeks power, and it's through newspapers, and just the thrust of his life is to that end. And um, until he met Rourke, kind of like you and me, his life is lived one way until he met. Well, first Dominique is a pivotal shift, but then again meeting Rourke, because Dominique is not the integrity. His purpose is to break men of integrity. That's his like stated purpose. They don't exist anymore, and we see Ayn Rand giving example after example, and then you wonder how will Rourke.
Yeah, Dwight
exactly
Carson. Right?
wonder.
Remember
Yes,
Dwight
that's right.
Carson. Yeah, as the perfect example.
Yeah.
Yeah, Wynand heard, brilliant young kid, various jobs in Hell's Kitchen, tough slum neighborhood on the west side of Manhattan, right on the Hudson River docks. He's
Mhm.
working various jobs, and he has innovative ideas on how to improve things, and the owners are telling him, "Shut up, kid! You don't run things around here."
Yeah.
And so he thinks the only way for an innovative mind to get anywhere in the world is to get power over these dolts, who control
Mhm.
society. So he sells his soul for power, and yeah, and then he's threatened by any man of integrity. He's got to break the guy. He's got to get the guy to sell his soul as to keep reaffirming to myself, I made the right choice. I sold my soul, but I got a good price, as he says at one point. There are no men of integrity.
Yes.
Every man has his
Yeah.
price. Everybody will sell their soul. Tells Dominique, God help you if you were a man. I would go after you, and break your spirit. He tries it with Rourke, and of course
Yes.
Rourke turns the tables on. Rourke won't do it. Won't sell his soul no matter what no matter what Wynand's going to do. Won't sell out his values.
No, but the thing that gets me here, the principle, Rourke's independence, because he's independent with every other character. We see him as like the sun, and every other character are the planets revolving, and they have more or less independence. And Wynand, we know, is a mixed case. But the thing that draws me to the two of them is the friendship. Rand doesn't have another pair that shows the kind of friendship that these two men have for each other. It's love too. It's not romantic love, but it's the love they have for each other, which neither of them thought they would. And we, even as the reader who have the backstory, knowing that Dominique is already married to Wine by the time he meets Rourke, but the friendship, which Dominic says love is exception making, and Rourke wants to maintain that friendship and almost comes very close to even quote sacrificing. At the very end when he knows Wynand is pretty much a broken man, but he still wants to, because he loves him and is such a friend to him, and knows that Wynand doesn't have anybody else. Uh, Rourke wants to save him. He wants to do whatever he can to save Wynand after he sells out. And I'll just say one last thing, Andy. You talk about Keating. Every time I read the Fountainhead, when Wynand is in that boardroom, I hope he doesn't say. Every time I read the book, I'm like, don't say take over Alva Scarrett. Don't sell out Howard Roark for 2 cents, and he does. And I've done so many walks in New York City late at night. And by the time, before I read The Fountainhead, and then every time when Gail Wynand does that walk, that lonely walk throughout the city, knowing he sold him out, I was not born to be a first-hander like you. I mean, that's one of the saddest lines in the entire novel.
Right, right. There's again one brilliant scene after another. At Rourke's trial for the Cortland dynamiting, when the jury comes in with the verdict, the defendant has
Yeah.
to stand. Rourke stands.
Mhm.
Wynand stands at the back of the courtroom because verdict is being pronounced on him. and it's in
Him.
inverse
Yes.
proportion to the verdict on Roark. If Roark is guilty, then Wynand's vindicated. It shows that the man of
Hmm.
integrity can't succeed in this world, and I
Yep.
did the right thing to sell my soul for for great success. But if Roark is acquitted, then it shows that the independent man of integrity can succeed on his own terms, and Wynand's convicted. It's brilliant in and of itself, but even deeper than that, it sets up the hero. The hero has to take a blow. The hero, a blow for Howard Roark is inescapable here. He's either going to prison or his best friend, his nearest and dearest friend, is going to be spiritually crushed. Either way, what did Ayn Rand say in her fiction writing course? Make it as hard as you can for your hero.
Conflict.
Whoa, whoa,
Yeah.
wow,
Conflict.
wow,
Conflict.
yeah,
Conflict.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. Boy, this is so brilliant.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, everything. Well, and also the way Ayn Rand described the theme of the book, you can see it's individualism versus, independence versus dependence. But Ayn Rand's description of the theme is just brilliant. What did she say? It's
Yes.
it's individualism versus collectivism, not in politics,
Not
but
in
in men's souls.
politics, but in men's souls. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I
Hmm.
mean, that was perfect. That is the perfect. I wouldn't have thought of that because I couldn't have written the
No.
Fountainhead either. But that's the perfect description of the theme. Toohey has political aspirations. He wants to impose a communist dictatorship and be the intellectual advisor behind the throne. Other than that, there's really little or no politics in the book. It's an epistemological rather than a political story. It's about how men choose to use their minds. Do they choose to focus on nature, on reality, on facts, and look for truth in nature, or do they choose to follow society and be conformists and look for truth in what other people tell us? And it's a brilliant epistemological story about how men use their minds or their souls, as Ayn Rand puts it. And there's just
Yeah.
Howard Roark, the man of independence. I mean, over and over, it's
Hmm.
in all these different relationships and conflicts. He shows his
Yeah.
independence. What about when after the started, they're going to tear down the started temple, and Dominique, who's so in love with him, she comes to visit, and and they're so intimate. They don't even have to say a word. He takes one look at her, and he knows. He says, "I don't feel." He says, "I don't feel like that. Don't look that way." And what does Dominic
Yeah.
says, "I don't want to know," and Rook says, "I want you to know." And that's when he talks
That's
about
right.
the pain and only goes
Yeah.
down to a certain
To
point.
a certain point.
And this,
Hmm.
yeah, the certain point. She says, "Well, where's that point?" Dominique says, and he says, "When I can think of nothing except that I built that. I built that
I
temple,
built it.
and
Yeah.
I built it.
I.
It was real. It's real, not a
Yeah.
fantasy. It's not a figment of anybody's imagination. It was real. I did it." Look what he's saying to her. Look, it's painful. Society's going to tear down my baby. It's painful. I heard, but
Hmm.
the deeper levels, my own judgment. I know that is a masterpiece. Nothing that anybody says about it or does to it can alter my judgment of reality. I know over and over again, Ayn Rand shows us how independent Roark is. My judgment, my values. Wow. Wow. And again, the
Yeah.
contrast with Henry Cameron, who is very independent also. He does his own work. He doesn't go by society. But when society rejects him, it rankles in his soul. It makes him
Yeah.
bitter and he turns to alcohol and everything. Well, it doesn't
Yes.
rankle in Rourke's soul because he knows the greatness of his own work. And what society thinks of it or society's rejection of it is an enormously secondary consideration. So put it this way, it affects my career if they reject me, but it doesn't affect my self-esteem. I think that's critical for Rourke in contrast to Cameron.
Yes. Yeah. So I'd like to read one short paragraph, which is my favorite line, my favorite segment in the whole book, not by Rourke. So this shows how Wynand, the towering figure of Wynand, talking about skyscrapers, says, "I would give the greatest sunset in the world for one sight of New York skyline, particularly when one can't see the details, just the shapes and the thought that made them. The sky over New York and the will of man made visible. What other religion do we need?" Says, "I don't feel how small I am, but I feel that if a war came to threaten this, I would like to throw myself into space over the city and protect these buildings with my body.
Gail Wynand speaking. Right?
What a giant. What a view. What a first handed view. Again, the contrast of nature and man made. And Wynand knows the integrity of skyscrapers, even if he's not living up to it. This is the bond. This is where Dominique and Wynand connect on a level that they had not done before. And we know that Roark is the builder who Wynand is referring to there, the will of man that made all of this possible. So again, for me, Andy, and you as New Yorkers, we have the units for this. We've been in this world and we have benefited from the creativity that Rand is paying homage to in this novel. So let's go to Dominique now. If
Yeah, my
the
all-time
last character.
favorite, my all-time favorite Ayn Rand heroine. Dagny Taggart may be the greatest heroine in world literature, but I fell in love with Dominique when I was 16, and I'm still in love with her. And the thing the thing I wanted to say about Dominique is she meets, Dominique's a head case. I mean, she's so afraid of being, hurt by the world. One of my students at Marymount I was talking about before hated Dominique. She attempts to wreck Rourke's career. And I think a lot of people hate Dominique. And the student, who's an adult, she never referred to Dominique by name. She just, whenever she referred to her, she called her psycho broad. So, from a certain perspective, Dominique's a psycho. But here's what's so special about Dominique. She meets Rourke at the lowest ebb of his career. He's in a granite quarry. She has no idea he's a genius, or two, he's a man of great integrity. He says it's just a worker in a granite quarry. He might be a convict for all she knows, although she takes one look at him and she knows he isn't. But she falls in love with him at the lowest point in his career. She recognizes that he's got the face of a god. This of moral strength made real that she's never encountered before or since. And in that moment, she gives herself to Rourke. From that instant till the day she dies, till her last breath, her heart, soul, mind, spirit all belong to Howard Roark. She marries his other guys because she's afraid of what the world would do to her or do to Rourke, and thereby do to her if she let herself be in that intimate relationship with him. But spiritually, emotionally, intellectual, everything about her of value is in love with Howard Roark, belongs to Howard Roark. She is the most impassioned idealist in the universe of Ayn Rand's books. That is, what is Gail Wynand talks about, total love for the total height? Well, Dominique lives it. Howard Roark's the total height, and Dominique is total love for him. She can't respond to the halfway, the not quite, the in between. Only man at his highest and best. The Greek statuette, the Howard Roark's buildings, Howard Roark. She loves man at his highest and best completely, passionately, and that's what makes her so special. For all of her errors and all of her mistakes, that's what makes Dominique so special. That's why Roark loves her. Yes, she's a beautiful woman, but she's as beautiful inside for all of her errors as is her external beauty. She'll get old. We age, we wrinkle, and so on and so forth. Dominique's inner beauty will never die.
She makes it to 1990 as well, I would say.
Yes,
for
yes,
sure.
she does, and has a career, and has a real career as a writer. Wynand said, "Why don't you look for a real career?" She said, "I never wanted a real career." Well, not on the banner, but Dominique's going to have a real career as a journalist, and Roark as an architect, and they're going to live happily ever after for many, many, many decades.
Yeah. So again, going to Rourke's independence. So he has these temptations from Wynand with friendship, from Toohey with the adulation Toohey's seeking, and then from Dominique with the romance, where he has a chance to cave in and be with her at a time when, again, if we could say the second lowest point in his life, he's not working in a quarry, but he's doing 5-story walk-ups, buildings, and she thinks he's a failure at this point, and he does not. And later on, Wynand asks him, "Have you ever held power over someone?" He said, "No, and I wouldn't if it was offered to me." And he says it was offered by a woman, and it was out of respect for myself. So that independent judgment that Roark, because he knows it's going to be 7 years, the timeline of the novel is going to be 7 years until they are actually together. But she's not ready, and he can't sacrifice his independent judgment for this short term, passion that would not last. And he tells her, you wouldn't like me if we were together and I gave up architecture.
Yeah, could you imagine Rourke being a clerk in a shoe store, married to Dominique? See, he's pointed out, I'd be so miserable. You love me so much. You could never be happy seeing that one I was miserable and knowing that I was miserable because I gave in to your request. Yeah, he when he said, "Oh, you begged me to go back to architecture in about
Yes.
3 minutes," and of course, he's absolutely right. By the way, something about Dominique again that's really good. Dominique's mistaken. She holds this malevolent society view that society is so corrupt and so opposed to greatness that it'll crush great men. And she has some units for this. She saw what happened to Cameron. Right. She saw her own father, who was a fraud. She knows he's a fraud. Is a success. Well, Cameron, who's real deal, is a commercial failure. Keating is even more like Francon than Francon is, and he's on his way to this great success. Whereas Roark, who's more like Cameron than Cameron is in a granite quarry, and so she has units. Ellsworth Toohey, who she knows to be the worst villain, is lionized by society as a saint. She has units to support her claim that society is corrupt and will destroy the great man. But it's a content error. Methodologically, she uses her own mind. She sees with her own eyes and she understands with her own brain. It doesn't matter to her what society thinks of Howard Roark. She knows who and what he is, and that's why she hero worships him as well as loves him. And so she's watching. She sees what goes on. She sees Keating not only becomes a failure, but he becomes a failure because he sold his soul. She sees Wynand heading towards some terrible cataclysm because he sold his soul. She sees Toohey completely unable to stop Roark. She sees Roark going on to success because he holds on to his own values, his own judgment, his own soul. And Dominique moves off center. She changes her mind. She realizes, I was wrong. So they can't stop Roark. She realizes it's Ayn Rand showing us here, being independent, going by your own judgment, doesn't make you infallible. We're fallible beings, but it gives us a self-correcting mechanism to improve, to ameliorate our errors. And Dominique shows us that in action. She changes her mind. She learns better. It's her independence that enables her to do that. So again, kudos to Dominique, and Roark knows that about her. Again, that's he knows that's going to happen as he succeeds. He knows Dominique will see it, and he's right. He's right. That's what makes Dominique so special and why she's the right woman for him. And Ayn Rand didn't even put any other women in his life. She cut out the scenes with Vesta Dunning. No other women in Roark's life, so far as we know, because nobody can remotely live up to Dominique Francon.
Who Ayn Rand said herself, "I'm Dominique in a bad mood," right? That was
It's a great line.
That is a great line.
She sees the corruption in society.
Her perception about Toohey, because she's the only one who sees what he's up to, and even tells Gail Wynand, fire Toohey. Mm-hmm. And Wynand is above that. He is so out of touch with what Toohey's all about that he dismisses that. He doesn't even allow her to continue the discussion. So, okay. So how about the heroism of Roark? I think, again, if we look at all of Rand's corpus, a favorite scene where hero worship is exactly the point. Monadnock Valley. We opened up part 4, Howard Roark.
And the boy who always wanted to write music.
The boy on the bicycle. I mean, the description of that is just so. I won't take time now to read any part of it, but he wants to write music, and he's told all these uh, platitudes about service to others, and he's like, no, I just want to write music. Tchaikovsky's second and first, and Rachmaninoff second gives, but he sees Roark, he sees Monadnock Valley, and Roark gives him just without in the exchange of a visual exchange and a couple of sentences, he gives his boy the courage to fill a lifetime, and that is so. It's so uplifting to me, Andy, because I think of Rand's works personally. This is what she's done for me since my teenage years, and it's enduring this idea, this hero worship idea.
Yeah, it's maybe the most touching scene that I've ever read. The way he inspires the boy who always wanted to write music, gives him the courage to face a lifetime. And real, yeah, you're right. It's what Ayn Rand herself has done, and what an answer for any honest person to Ayn Rand's critics, who thinks she's malevolent, and hates humanity, and so on and so on. What an answer Ayn Rand gave us here in this scene with Howard Roark about it. Not not sacrificing the self in the attempt to help others, not running a welfare state or anything, but inspiring others to be the best they can be. What a gift that is from one human being to one of his brothers or sisters, which is what Ayn Rand's showing us here. We're brothers and sisters as human beings. And you see Howard Roark inspires so many people, including Mallory, who we haven't even discussed yet. And by the way, Robert, this book is so rich and the character is so rich. I think we should just do a second. I think we should do a second show, on Roark's heroism and the impact he has on other people. Yeah. The impact he has on other characters like Mallory and Dominique.
Mallory, Mike Donegan, Austin Heller. Right. Yeah, I mean, we can go through each one, how he affects them. I said it's kind of like he's the sun and they're the planets. And we only talked about the major minor characters, but then there are more minor characters. Right. And Mike Donegan. The units.
Right. Was it
Sean Xavier Donegan, right?
Yeah, the construction worker, hard hat, tough guy. He's Valerie, of course, has taken a shot at Toohey, and he's mercurial and explosive. And I think it's at the Cortland trial where Mike's sitting next to him, watching over him, and tells him the mortal line. He says, "A man can't get sick just because he ought to." He says to him,
right?
About
the perfect blue collar guy. He's the blue collar guy that, again, that Ayn Rand knows how to concretize. You're right, Andy. Let's continue this in the second part, because it is so rich. We haven't gotten to the courtroom trial. We haven't. There were dramatic scenes, but then there's these interactions. But again, independence versus dependence, not in politics, but in men's soul.
Played out over and over again. Like Ayn Rand describes Monadnock Valley itself, Roark's imagination, like endless variations on a theme. Well, Ayn Rand in endless variations on the theme of independence versus dependence in this story. Different characters, different scenes, conflicts. It comes up over and over and over, gets played out brilliantly in many different versions. So why don't we just draw a line? And we really have something to look forward to next week. Howard Roark Part 2. Everybody. So let's salute not only Howard Roark, but his creator, Ayn Rand, the greatest novelist in world literature. And I'll say, Robert, I hope you have a more heroic day, and everybody out there in Hero Land, we're all going to strive to lead a more heroic life. And we'll be back next week with more Howard Roark on the Hero Show.